Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift.
It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices.
Hello and welcome to Jen Taylor Rerouting, where being rude is never acceptable, but sarcasm is welcome and swearing isn't always a bad option. Let's get started. Welcome to Mom's Running It. Today I have Matt Pendola. Super excited about this. Matt has a training facility called pendolatraining.com. I have had the pleasure of visiting there a couple times, and I even trained there with Sarah and Lupe, but not for a super long time, unfortunately, doing running training. And Matt's one of those people that makes me realize that the degrees of separation are alive and well, because first of all, Matt, normally I jump around in people's stories because I ask you for a little background information. Yours, I think we're going to go a little bit more chronological, which is, either way is good. What year were you born?
1973.
Okay. See, I was trying to figure it out, and I thought it was 72. So I was born in 1970. And here's the interesting thing. I grew up in Coventry and Warwick, Rhode Island. And where were you? You were in Providence in junior high school, but where were you before that?
I was in East Hartford, Connecticut for some of my earlier years, and then I eventually went back there for high school because my grandparents lived there. But I traveled around quite a bit. My mom was a bit of a gypsy. We lived in Maine, and we also lived in Massachusetts. And I mean, quite honestly, we lived out of our car for a lot of it. So, you know, we traveled a lot.
Traveled a lot in those days in this situation is not the same as what people traditionally think travel a lot means, but it was the same for me. It was Rhode Island for 13 years, but we lived in New Hampshire, Massachusetts. My mother was from Enfield, Connecticut, and then Vermont. So interesting. So you were born in Connecticut, and neither one of us have an accent, which is usually why I don't think we're from the same place.
Right.
So
I was always accused of having an accent earlier on, you know, but now I've lived out west more of my life than I lived back east. So, you know, I think I lost it over time.
I hid mine on purpose because I was embarrassed. So somehow I thought if people heard the New England accent, they'd see like my baggage, or they'd know, you know, what happened. And so,
Right.
So you live with your mom, and you had one older sister, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So you were 6 when you were living with your mom and exposed to a lot of stuff. What are your memories of that time?
Yeah, I definitely feel like I have to say first, my mom was a very loving person, but you know, she was addicted to a lot of drugs. She was you know, the original hippie, and she did you know, enjoy you know, smoking pot like most kids at that time, or most you know, young people of that time and era did. And then she started getting into, you know, acid, and I'm sure there were some other things that I was probably too young to recognize and to understand. But, you know, the main thing I recall is, you know, I had a loving mother. I always knew that she loved me, but that really was not ready to be a mother. And my sister and I, very early on, if you've ever seen the show, I think it's called Shameless. But you know, we were kind of in that situation where we're always kind of taking care of each other. And we pretty much knew that there were periods of time when our mother was incapacitated. And, you know, one day we woke up, you know, we were in a teepee in Lake Tahoe, by the river, that some people had shown her how to build a teepee, and we were now living in the teepee for about 6 months. And I recall waking up in the morning and seeing my mother running around naked with a bunch of people, and we were in a nudist colony, apparently. So, you know, it's a lot of memories like that, where I was just, I guess being a kid, I didn't really have anything to compare it to. I guess I probably figured everybody lived that way.
Right.
you know.
Well, you don't know. And when I wrote the book about growing up, I actually did some pretty extensive research on the 70s. And not that that excuses behavior, but it was definitely a different time period.
Yes. Yes, it was.
It's hard to believe, but it truly was. So your mom, actually, you were about 6, left you at a bar.
Yep.
A guy tried to bring you guys home.
He did. Yeah. He decided he was gonna, take care of us, and who knows what would have happened if we had went home with this guy.
Yeah, that's a pretty scary thing also. But I mean, I remember spending a lot of time in the bar,
Yeah.
when I was that age. So your dad ended up getting you, and your dad had remarried, and so he took custody of you guys, both of you guys then?
Yes, he did.
Okay, and then so from 6, let's go from 6 to 12.
Okay.
That was when you were living with your dad and your stepmom.
Right. Yeah. So, my dad had just recently married and he got custody of us. He had a successful business at the time, and I'm sure that all helped his situation out, getting custody of us. But his wife was, about 10 years younger than he was, and she was just barely, I think, out of college and really not ready to take on a couple kids. I think my sister and I were pretty well-behaved kids, but pretty quickly it got abusive, and so I guess because I was the boy, I took more of that. She really didn't put a lot of that on my sister, and I was actually really thankful for that. But it was hell. I mean, there was a lot of hard times there where, you're just in elementary school at the time thinking that you just don't want to go home, the worst for me was I was really still close to my mother. And when my dad got custody of us, it was a brutal scene. I mean, she was tearing his hair out in the courtroom and going crazy because she had lost custody of us and she knew that she was to blame for that. But my stepmother had decided that we couldn't call her mother anymore. We had to call our stepmother mother, and we had to call our real mother Sharon. And then, when it came time for her to visit us, our real mother, she would just at the last minute say that we couldn't see her because we had been bad, things like that. And so it was really, really tough, missing our mother the way that we did. And then just dealing with the abuse. I mean, I had my nose broken, my jaw broken, things like that.
So how did did you tell him about it? Fall down the stairs a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So my dad was a functioning alcoholic, and so I do believe in his way that he loved us, but he had always, I think, envisioned something different for himself. And when it came to having a couple of kids, I think he got himself a wife, and now it was her job to take care of us. It wasn't really his job. His job in his mind was to make the money, and he was doing that. And so we saw very little of him.
Right. That again is a common thing back then.
That's right. Yeah. And he's Italian family. His father had always been that way, and he was that way. He owned a donut shop at the time. So he, worked all night and then slept during the day. By the time we came home, he was gone. So I think it's fair to say that he went weeks at a time without really seeing us. Right. So it's been so long, but I do remember that our stepmother, she would definitely, the classic scenario, you would get abused in places where it wasn't as easily seen, except for the couple times where it got out of hand, and then then you could see it. But I'm not sure that my dad did ever notice it.
Right. And again, I mean, those words, functioning alcoholic, because my father always held a job. Mm-hmm. Always, but he was also always chain smoking and drunk and in a fit of rage. And so I don't you can function at your job and that makes you a functioning alcoholic, but you're not really functioning in life.
Right.
And that's, again, in that time period, that was so much more common and normal and mainstream than people realize. I mean, you tell your story and they think, well, how come no one ever said anything or made a report? Well, even if they had, that doesn't mean anything would have changed in the situation. And that's hard to wrap your head around. And the 70s were just really a very different time.
Yes.
So you were 12 and you had an incident that was I'm assuming quite pivotal in your life when you were 12 and you tried to kill yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So you were just in or going into junior high school, which are some of the hardest years anyway, kind of emotionally for kids, in this situation where your mom was a little out there but loving, and your dad was functioning alcoholic, and your stepmom was beating the hell out of you. So what got you there? What happened with that?
You know, my grandfather, who really meant a lot to me, and he was the rock, and you know, he was a veteran and a war hero, and I've got his Purple Heart in my office to remind me of where I came from. You know, he passed away of cancer, and they believe it was probably from Agent Orange during the war. You know, all of a sudden, I really didn't have that rock anymore, and so I went to his basement, and you know, I put a rope up, and you know, I tried to hang myself. It didn't work, you know, and thankfully, obviously, but I think that it was more in that moment of trying to imagine what the rest of my life was going to be like, that I just decided that it wasn't worth it. And then, you know, I kind of took it as a sign of it not working, that I was supposed to be around. And so in a weird way, and I obviously would not want anyone to ever go through that moment, but that probably allowed me to move forward.
Wow.
When, you know, when it didn't work, and, you know.
Right. And right around this time period, your dad caught your stepmom beating you.
Yeah. Yes, he did.
What was his reaction to that?
You know, I think he was pretty horrified. And I think from what I recall, the transition was immediate. He brought me to my uncle's house. I stayed with him, and he went through the divorce. And I remember going to my uncle's house and realizing that, you know, it was over. And I had a whole, you know, different relationship with my father for a while, and it was really, really good. He spent more time with me. I actually worked for him over that summer, you know, 40 hours a week during the summer, and we spent a lot of time together that way. But then he got pretty depressed, and the drinking got worse and worse, and so unfortunately that didn't last long. And my sister and we both kind of saw that my dad was really spiraling, you know, out of control at that point. It was no longer a functioning alcoholic. It was just full-blown alcoholism. And so his business failed soon after that. And we had to move out of our, you know, nice home, and we moved into, you know, North Providence, and basically all of a sudden we were getting used to a whole different environment. You had to be in a gang to survive, really, or at least that was what I thought when I first got to that particular junior high school. And that entire environment was really, really difficult because, you know, I wasn't tough that way. I didn't know how to protect myself. I didn't know, you know, even how to blend in with the other kids. So junior high was quite difficult.
Well, and that's something, growing up in Rhode Island, you know, it's not a city you hear about like DC or Chicago or New York, but it was a different life if you were spending a lot of it on the street. And both of us did that. And when you're kicked out of your house, you don't have a house, and you're on the street a lot, it was a pretty scary place to be back then. Even though it's not one of the more notorious areas, it was pretty ghetto.
Mm-hmm.
And man, tough. And so in junior high school, is this where you met Mr. Gray?
Yeah.
This is where the story turns. Because up to this point, the people that were pivotal, I mean, clearly your grandfather was the most pivotal.
Yeah.
And then your mom wasn't a bad experience or relationship necessarily, just kind of unique. Is that a good way to put that?
Yes. Yeah. That's a good way.
And not traditionally, it wasn't traditional. It wasn't a traditional relationship. The gypsy thing was real common back then. I have a bit of that in my personality as well. So you're in junior high school, two of the hardest years. You have a grandfather who's now passed away, a dad who's spiraled out of control, a mom who's kind of a gypsy and at least loves you, but isn't really able to take care of you. Uncle, you were close to your uncle, or?
Yeah, I definitely got close to him that summer that I lived with him and his family. And he definitely was a major influence on me. And I'll never forget, at one point, my uncle told me to stop trying to make my father proud of me, because he said, you know, your father doesn't want you to do better than he's done. And that's the truth of it. And that really stuck with me, because this was his brother who, loved him, but was a lot of the things that he wasn't. And I certainly had wished many times that my uncle was my father instead at that point, you know. And I definitely realized that up until that point, I always thought that my father was kind of a man's man, and who you're supposed to be as a man, just the roles you take on. And I started realizing through my uncle that not all men were like that. And, and that he was, strong and a really good father. But of course, he had a lot more emotional connection with his kids and was super supportive. And that's when I realized that, my father wasn't necessarily somebody to look up to. And that was pretty pivotal, because the drinking, the smoking, the drugs, I had made a decision very early on, because it was all around me, and we're in Providence especially. And a lot of my good friends, I mean, I say I was in a gang, and, we were a gang, but these were just confused kids with no real parenting. I wasn't alone in that aspect. And these guys were all getting on a lot of hard drugs pretty early on. And I just made that decision. I wasn't going to do that. And, thankfully. So, I think that probably my uncle had a lot to do with that.
Right. I think some of us just have this innate sense to not go down that path, because I was surrounded with it also. And just the decision that this isn't, you don't know what the right way is, but you know that this isn't it.
Right.
And so I stayed away from drugs too. And I think also I had a healthy fear of what I could become. And I didn't want to become that. So you're in junior high school in Providence, and there's Mr. Gray. So tell me about Mr. Gray.
Okay. Yeah. So I had mentioned to you, but this was probably the biggest pivotal point for me when we were hanging out, my friends and I, at the street corner, and literally like you can envision it, a bunch of kids, nothing else to do, hanging out by the 7-Eleven. And this guy runs by, and my friends start throwing rocks at him. They think it's funny. I admired the fact that this guy was working so hard towards something. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that he was, working hard, and I respected that about him. It wasn't the first time I had seen him run by, and I wasn't one of the kids who threw the rock. And the rocks. And the next time I saw him running by, I just decided I would try to run with him. And I still don't know why I did it, but I did it. And we probably ran, back then I thought it was probably a marathon, right? But it was probably 3 miles at the most that I ran with him. But he was impressed that I had kept up with him, and he told me, if you want, you can run with me tomorrow. And so I did. And Mr. Grays was turned out to be a Masters champion in 10K races all the way through like marathons. And he started giving me some advice on what type of workouts to do and to get better. And then after a while, he told me, he said, you should really think about competing. So I started doing that, and I did well early on. And Mr. Graves was, in a lot of aspects, my coach. And of course, there came a point where he realized that I needed to get out of Providence. And he said, I had a race where I beat the state champion at that time by over a minute in a race. And he said, you've got to get out of here. You're not going to get what you need around here. And I've kind of taught you everything I can. So that's when I left Providence, and I moved to East Hartford, Connecticut. My grandmother lived there, and the coach there had just been named the National Coach of the Year. So
wow.
Yeah. So that's why I did it. My grandmother agreed to take me in, and so I started school in East Hartford my freshman year.
It's amazing how pivotal something you think is so small can be in your life. And so you moved to high school. You graduated from East Hartford High?
I did not. No, I ended up graduating in Tempe, Arizona at McClintock High School.
Okay.
And that was my senior year. And the short of it is, as soon as I turned 18, I wanted to be as far away from my family as possible, to be honest with you. So I got in a bus. I went out to McClintock. I was 18. I signed myself into school, and I graduated on my own. So. Okay.
So while you were in Connecticut, for that part of high school, you lived sometimes with your grandmother, sometimes in government housing with your mom. Grandma was also an alcoholic?
Yeah, she was.
And your dad, and so you were with friends and their parents who took pity on you. And tell me a little bit about those couple years.
Yeah, like you had said before, it's just amazing the people that you meet, and you don't realize at the time that they're going to help you. And I just think that humanity is amazing that way. People really step in that barely even know you and change your life. And I had a mother of a friend that really took pity on me. Actually, it was 2 different mothers of 2 different friends. And I tried to kind of share the space between the 2 homes as much as I could, so I wasn't too much of a burden on either one. But neither one of these families had a lot of money, and yet they always fed me. They always made sure that I had a home, and it was it's even tough to talk about now, but it was an incredible experience to know how much people are willing to help you, even when they don't have a lot that they can give. They'll still give you what they have. And so both of those families I'm forever in debt to. So that was the Segarras and the Cams, and they were really, really pivotal for me, because it taught me that if I was willing to do the right thing, if I was willing to just give my best, that people would help me, and that I wasn't really on my own, and they believed in me. So, that really changed my outlook, because before that, I felt like I was really on my own much through high school. I talked about, my mother did love me very much, and I think it's important that a kid does feel loved. So I keep emphasizing that, because I know that that made a big difference in who I was. But, that being said, she would take off for months at a time. And I think it was peyote that was really into at that time. And she wouldn't even remember a lot of times what had happened. And later on in her life, we would talk about what happened when I was younger. And it was like whole blocks of time that she just didn't even remember anymore, And so, for me, I just found that I could still love my mother, but realize that she was broken, and try to learn more from other positive influences and people that could really teach me how to survive.
Right. So in all of this, you're struggling with learning disabilities.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that and what that was like.
Yeah. So, going back to the stepmother thing, she was actually a teacher. She went on to become a principal, which is,
Cruel irony.
It is. And, back then I had these difficulties, but, she just told me I was stupid. I mean, there was no other way to say it. She told me that several times. I think you just end up believing it. And I stopped trying. I stopped trying to do well in school. But I had some forms of dyslexia, and I had some, ADD difficulties. We'll call it that. And I say it that way because I think a lot of kids are misdiagnosed, and I feel like I was never that person who was going to get on meds, was never going to be on any type of drug. So I refused any kind of assistance that way. But, it wasn't until high school where I really realized how much difficulty I had in just keeping up. And so, I just took the easiest classes I possibly could and just figured, look, I've got to make it as a runner. And that's all I care about. I'll stay in school because I want to compete and I want to get to a higher level, but I'll do it as an athlete. I'll never do it as an academic.
And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, having kids myself, I'm always excited when they're in anything athletic. One, because it's physical and it's athletic, but also because it kind of forces them to a certain degree to have a certain GPA, or to at least work with their teachers as in situations that were difficult. And you did that. You had a teacher named Mr. Ellis.
Yes. And he was, again, humanity steps in. So he was my anatomy and physiology teacher. And so, of course, what I do now, I can definitely link it to him. He taught me to love it.
No kidding. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was failing the class pretty early on. Obviously, I could not memorize the way that the rest of the kids did. And so he sat me down and he said, look, I know that you've got a difficult time, and you're having a difficult time. I know that you're struggling, but if you want the help, I'll give it to you. And so he started meeting with me during our cafeteria time, and I had a zero period after my cafeteria time. And he would start to teach me about how the running muscles worked and how I could relate that. And as soon as he started to explain things to me the way he did, it clicked really quickly for me. And for some reason, that was the one thing. It wasn't hard for me to learn anymore. I was able to really do well. And that's kind of what taught me too, that, I don't know if I have, a learning disorder as much as I just have to learn a different way.
Absolutely. It took until I had a college professor finally that said, stop running into the tree and running into the tree. You need to learn how to go around the tree.
Yes.
And I mean, with learning, we're all different. We shouldn't have to all learn things the same way. And it doesn't make any one person smarter than another. It just means that you learn in a different way. And so I think we spend a lot of time running into the tree. And
right. It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, well, when she said it that way, I was like, yeah, that's what I feel like. I feel like I'm just beating myself against the wall. And then you feel like you're not smart. and that has nothing to do with it. So Mr. Ellis made that pivotal difference, and you were running. Now, did you start having trouble with injuries when you were in Connecticut, or did that happen later in Arizona?
No, yeah, it was when I was in Connecticut. And I had put so much emphasis on my running to get myself, you know, out from where I was. It was my way out. And so I put way too much emphasis on it. I ended up running 100 miles a week, when I was 15 years old, just trying to get to the point where I could beat everybody and get a full ride scholarship somewhere. And it worked until it didn't. So, eventually I was just constantly injured. And of course there was no money for physical therapy, or I didn't have a strength coach. I didn't know what I was doing. I would read a book about Bill Rogers, and his training, or Frank Shorter, or any of those guys. I would do those workouts just thinking that, well, if they do them, I'll do them and I'll be as good as they are, and of course I had no concept of the things that I coach on now, that I should be running 35 miles a week and maximizing my potential at a young age. That's all I needed to do, but I didn't understand that. So I just did way too much too soon. And by the time my injuries, got the better of me, it really affected my running. So by the time I was a senior, I wasn't even running anymore. So I went from setting records my freshman year to not even running my senior year.
And what's so hard for people to understand is this was pre-internet. This was pre lots of stuff. And there wasn't an easy way. I mean, we actually went to the library and looked things up in the index.
Yeah.
I checked a book out and had to read it. I mean, this is the age of information, we're inundated with information. And back then we really didn't have a lot of information. You had to hear it from someone who heard it from someone, or check out the book, or have the whole set of encyclopedias that weren't too outdated at your house to even learn about this stuff. So it would have been very difficult for you at that point to even get your hands on enough of the right information anyway, even if it had been out there.
Right.
So no wonder you injure yourself, you turn 18, you hightail it. You do not want anything to do with New England or family, and you take off. So what made you decide on Tempe?
Well, at the time, I really just wanted to get out of Connecticut. And I had some really good memories of being out west when I was, just 5 years old even. And, even though they were very, very vague memories, it did feel like happiness when I thought about being out west. And my mother always talked about living out west is so much better than where we were at. And so I think that I just wanted to experience it, and I didn't know what I was going to be doing. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I just wanted to get out. And I also, because I didn't have the opportunities anymore in running that I had originally, I felt like if I stayed, I was going to end up like so many of my friends, in jail, on drugs. Some of them had even died. Yeah. One of my good friends from junior high school had OD'd, and I just really felt like even though I had a conviction not to do that, now that I didn't have my running, that maybe I would get into those things. So I think I just wanted to get as far away from that as possible.
Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from as far as that goes. So you were looking for the nudist colony of teepees.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I get it. Okay, I want that too. I'm still looking for it. So you graduated, and then now you were living in your car, sleeping on people's floors. You ended up in San Diego. You graduated, and then what? Where were you living when you were going to high school?
Yeah, so I shared an apartment with I mean, I literally got off the bus and got myself a job telemarketing because it was the first job that I could get. It really was a horrible job, but I do have the gift of gab a little bit. I was able to, get that job right away. And it's funny because when they interviewed me for the job, I didn't even know what telemarketing was. And I walked out of there with a job. So, I got the job, and then I literally just looked in the newspaper for somebody who needed a roommate. Eventually I moved in with some college guys and shared some rent. I did that for a little while. And, I had a few years where I really didn't know what I wanted to do or how to get there. But I ended up joining the AmeriCorps, the National Civilian Community Corps. And that was one of the best experiences of my life, still is. And I remember that they were talking about AmeriCorps as being an outlet for the energy of youth who didn't have yet an idea or a focus on what they wanted to do with that energy. And I thought, well, that's me,
No kidding.
right? So
Holy cow.
I got in, and I was really, really happy about, the experience. It's the best thing I did for myself. We did unmet human needs. We did a lot of different projects where we would work on building trails for the environment, ADA accessible trails. Another project, we'd be in a school. I'd work with ESD kids. And then, we'd have another project where we were involved with Flagstaff with a, I guess back then they were calling it a fire crew, but we weren't really a fire crew. We were didn't know what we were doing, and we just were there for the experience. And over time, I got to know the fire marshal, and he opened up the world of fire to me. And then I was able to get enough experience where I got onto the Flagstaff Hot Shots after AmeriCorps, and that was my next step, getting into hot shotting. So, it really opened up a lot of doors for me, AmeriCorps, and I had mentioned Jane Turpin.
Yes, that was my next question. Jane Turpin was pretty much like your boss in AmeriCorps.
Yes, yeah. And so I started off as a Corps member, and then a few months into it, they were looking for team leaders, and the team leaders all had college degrees. I had never been to college, so I didn't think I'd get it. And I had another experience there where, again, humanity steps in, and Jane, she really believed in me, and she convinced people to give me a shot. And she started to work with me on how to lead the teams and what to do especially when it came to paperwork, government paperwork. You can imagine, I had no idea how to do administrative work, and she could have very easily just said, hey, this is on you, figure it out. That's your job now. But, she traveled to my first site that we were working with, and she said, hey, let's go out for a run. I know you like to run. And we got to know each other really well. And she said, okay, let me show you how you can do this, administrative work, because it is necessary for your job. And I was so dead against anything that it was even related to academics back then. I just figured I couldn't do it. So without her, I definitely wouldn't have learned how to do the paperwork. And I was good at the working part, but not the paperwork part. So,
right.
So she really held my hand and showed me everything I needed to learn. She was really, really an important figure for me. And I ended up being named the team leader of the year for the end of that year. And they gave me that fire position that I mentioned before, and I got to pick my crew. So I stayed a second year and did that. And, and without Jane, I definitely wouldn't have even made it through that first year as a team leader. Forget about being recognized as team leader of the year. It was really, I had the boss of the year. They should have given the award to her, but
Yeah, well, that's how it works sometimes, though. So then you moved to the fire and the hot shots, and you met your crew boss there, Paul Musser.
Yeah, yeah,
He was a tough guy.
yeah. Yeah, I
Uh,
remember.
what did that teach you, though?
Yeah, Paul, he was scary, man. I mean, you start working for a guy like that. He's been fire his entire life. He was a crew boss for 30 plus years. He really knew fire. But, he expected a lot out of, his crew. And, there was no such thing as slacking off for Paul. And I was used to working hard, but when you're working hard and you're still getting yelled at constantly, you just think, okay, there's no pleasing this guy. But over time, if you really paid attention, you could tell that Paul was the kind of guy who wanted to see you grow. And when you did that, he just gave you just an inch of support, but just enough, so
Keep you going, string you along.
That's right. That's right. And so I learned a lot at the end of the first year, he made me the head sawyer. So I ran the saws and I was in charge of the saw crew at the end of my first year. And so my second year going into that, I was in a more of a leadership position, and Paul relied heavily on me to kind of come through Sawyer's lead the crew. So now I had to learn to really put the pieces together in fire. It wasn't anymore about just, grunting, sweating it out. You had to actually think about it and what the crew should be doing next. And, that was, again, a pivotal part for me because I realized that, hey, a stupid person can't do this, right? And, and I still considered myself to be, challenged that way. But yet here was somebody teaching me that, I got into hot shotting, a lot of it because I thought, well, it's just physical. I can do that, and between Jane and Paul, that experience, it took a while, but I finally learned that, I might have more smarts to me than I realize. So, that was probably one of the biggest steps for me, realizing who I could be. And, a guy like Paul, he's not going to tell you did a good job unless you really did a good job. So it really helped me realize that I had some potential.
And in working, that you can work for anything you want, which followed you later when now you had just started physical therapy. Was it you that was in physical therapy?
I had done a lot of shadowing with physical therapists just because I was really interested in in that as a profession. And when I was in fire, I had moved over to a full-time permanent position. I ran dozers and heavy equipment in South Carolina. And it was at that time that they had said, hey, I had gotten their physical records in hot shotting and in engine, in the fire standards that they had. I had was fit enough to get new records. And so they just said, hey, you should train people. You should be in charge of training our firefighters. So I started getting into the training aspect, and then I started taking classes just on my own to learn how to do it better. And I eventually realized that I actually enjoy firefighting, but I think I'm really much better at this training thing. So.
Okay, so now that makes a little bit more sense to me. So John Metzger was one of the people that you kind of shadowed then.
Oh yeah, no. So John, he was somebody I ended up being his trainer. He was, he had been thrown from a vehicle. His shoulder had been entirely replaced. He couldn't lift his arm above his chest. And so I had to learn real quick, how can I help a guy like this, just be able to reach for, food in the cupboard. I mean, he wasn't looking to, set records or win medals. He just wanted to, grab the soup from the cupboard without being in pain. So.
Right. So, I mean, that's a normal thing to want to be able to do.
Right. Right.
And he's the one that gave you a quote that you kind of stuck to. These are pivotal people in your life, basically.
Yes.
And what was that quote?
Oh yeah. So, John, he had always told me that everyone told him he was lucky. You must be really lucky because John had owned a casino in Reno, Fitzgerald's.
Okay.
And so, he had quite the life. I mean, that you should have him on your podcast sometime because he has more stories than I do for sure. And just a really great guy. His son was J.K. Metzger. And he's gone through a lot of hardships, John, but he always comes out the other side, and I just really respect him a lot for that. But he said luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, and never forget that. If you always remember that, you'll always be lucky,
Which is true.
Yeah.
So you moved from Hot Shots to Reno. Is that how it happened?
Yeah, I had moved from Hot Shots over to that full-time permanent position, which everybody kind of wants in fire. And, that's when I was on an engine crew and I was running heavy equipment, the dozers and whatnot. And then they moved me to Truckee, and I was on an engine there, and they were training me to be an engine captain when that captain retired. But that's exactly what made me realize that this is really not what I want to do for a living. I felt like, this would be the next step for me logically, because it was a good job. You had full benefits, everything was there, but I didn't love it. And thinking to myself, I'm supposed to take over and be the captain. And it's a job where you're working 60 hours a week, and or more, and you got to love it. And I just realized that really I didn't love it. I shouldn't be the captain. I love training everybody for the position, but I don't love the position itself. So that's what convinced me that I needed to break from fire. And that was kind of a big step because my mother, she's passed away from cancer, and that was that time period. And so even though I was making good money because she had cancer, and she did not have the traditional, steps towards stage 4 cancer. Long story short is that I racked up all of my credit cards. All of the money I had in the world went towards taking care of her until she passed away. And so when I left fire, I not only didn't have anything, but I was probably over $30,000 in debt and credit cards alone. Then I decided that I was going to go ahead and start up this business. So you can...
Great timing, Matt.
Yeah.
Great, epic timing.
Right.
Okay, so that's when why Reno?
I just actually, because I was living in Truckee, it wasn't that far away. I was able to really check out the area, and I realized that there was really no gym in Reno. And I don't mean any offense to anyone who's had a gym in this area, but I didn't feel like there was a gym in Reno that really addressed training athletes. I felt like that was a good niche for me, and I felt like it wasn't being addressed here, and yet there was a big need for it. So I basically felt like, why not try to give it a go here? It made sense to me, and it's worked out. So.
And that was 2001, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so that was 2001, and then in 2003, you ended up actually in a building.
Yeah, that's, the first brick and mortar. I mean, I had,
Right.
I was an independent contractor before that. And I had a brief stint when I first moved here working at a 24-hour fitness. I realized very quickly that environment was not right for me. And so I just became an independent contractor and just renting out of gym space. But then when I worked hard at just saving my money as much as I could between clients. I worked at the Gerber baby factory, just stocking food and just putting my money away. And I was actually able to pay off my credit cards. And then I saved about maybe another, I think I had $27,000, and I said, okay, now it's time for me to buy a little bit of equipment and open up shop. And that's when I actually rented my own place.
Okay. Now, in the meantime, there are other people. So, I mean, your story's there's a lot of tragedy within the story.
Mm-hmm.
But then through all that, it's sprinkled with these people that really were mentors, that really made this huge pivotal impact. And like we've both talked about, sometimes you don't realize it at the moment, even if you appreciate it at the moment, but definitely over time, it's a compound interest sort of thing with these people who believe in you. So there were more people, and you've been great at highlighting those certain jobs and those certain people, and how one step led to the next. So I want to talk about a couple others of those. Mike Stoker's one of them. He
Yes.
owned Smile Shop for 30 years, and he gave you a book. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, Mike, he started to ride with me. He wasn't a client of mine, but we rode bikes together. And, he was one of those guys that he always had good advice to give. He was very much a father figure type to me. But, he saw where I had come from, and he was really rooting for me to have, a good life. And he really wanted that for me. And Mike, as a dentist, obviously you make a good living, but Mike has that life that everybody wants. I mean, he travels the world with his family. He really enjoys his life. He's semi-retired, kind of works when he wants to now, but he's one of those guys that you just realize he's really been smart about how he's invested his money. So he started telling me, look, you don't need to make a lot of money to have a lot of money. And he gave me a book called The Wealthy Barber. And at the time, I just said, Mike, I'm not making enough money to invest money. I'm barely making my rent, barely. And the truth of it is, when I first opened up, my first Pendola training, I lived in the gym. I literally lived in there. I would drive my truck inside the gym and slept under the stairs. I didn't have money for anything else. And so Mike said, well, I tell you what, I'm going to start training with you because I need to train, but you're going to take that money that I'm paying you and you're going to invest it, because you're telling me that you don't have any extra money, but you are making the rent barely, but you're doing it. So you don't really need this money I'm giving you. Not really. So he was right. So that's that. And of course, Mike's that kind of guy where I think he needed a trainer, but I think he also really wanted to, help. And so I did I honored that. He set up a Vanguard account for me. He set it all up for me. All I had to do was put the money in, and I have been doing that ever since. And
so he was financially able to prove a point.
Yes. Yes.
Very good. But what a great lesson.
Yes. Yeah, I can't thank him enough for that.
And then this is my favorite thing, and it's your gym mantra, and I know why, because you can't complain if you have this as your motto, okay? There is no hill for a climber.
Yeah.
Oh, well, but that takes out all my complaints, right? My ability to complain. Yeah. And that was from Les.
Yes.
So he was actually your first client for Pendola training 15 years ago, and still now. And even though he's not an athlete and he's 75, yeah, you'll always train him. So tell me a little bit about him.
Yeah, he's the only good thing that came out of 24 Fitness. See, I met him there. He had 2 heart attacks and a knee replacement. Nobody wanted to touch him. And, I started training him there. The first year, everything had to be really, really controlled. I wouldn't let him do a single workout without having a heart rate monitor on, and we really, really took our time progressing. And Les was one of those guys, he just wanted to be able to go out and hunt. He didn't really even want to be in the gym, but his insurance had said, look, we're not going to insure you anymore because, you've had 2 heart attacks now. So he had to prove to the doctors that he was insurable. So that was his whole incentive. So he could go hunting again. He's a world-class hunter. And so, I didn't know anything about hunting. I grew up in cities, but it was, really, really the most probably pivotal point for me. We've talked a lot about a lot of very important people in my life, but I would call Les my father now. And we bonded. And when it came to, how much I was willing to do for him, to help him, get healthy and realize that it was more than just hunting that we needed to do these things for. He gave just as much back to me every time. And he has had an incredible life. Again, another guy you should really interview.
All right, you're gonna become my new podcast PR agent here.
That's right. That's right. Les had been on his own since 15. And he ended up, he has Nesbitt Construction, that's his company. He ended up creating all of his own success completely on his own, and really old school guy. But here was a guy who really lived that mantra. There's no hill for a climber. And every time I was frustrated with the business, he would just remind me, I didn't make any money for the first 10 years, Matt. So what do you expect? You expect this just to be given to you? It's not going to be given to you. It's the war of attrition if you really want to do this, And so one day I was so frustrated because, I had, just barely made the rent again. I didn't have money to, go out and get a coffee. I was just really frustrated. And I said, Les, just remind me again, why am I doing this? And he said, Matt, there was a guy that I knew that he just loved taking out the garbage. And I was like, what do you mean love taking out the garbage? He's like, this guy loved taking out the garbage. I don't know why, but he did. And he said, and one day he owned his own dump. Right. And so I just, and of course he's just telling me a story, and the end result of that is, hey, do what you love and the rest will follow, and, quit complaining about it. If you keep working at it, it'll work out. And, what I realized later is that he was talking about himself. There was no guy taking out the garbage. He was talking about himself, and it worked for him, and he knew it would work for me. So, Les has really been that influence on me. And, quite honestly, when I have issues that are kind of beyond what I can handle and I really get overwhelmed with life, Les is right there for me. And I realized that I was always meant to meet him. I was always meant to be influenced by him, because I gained so much strength in knowing him. And so, because of him, I'm at where I'm at, the business is at where it's at. And also, he's just a phenomenal father and husband, and anything I do right in that capacity, I feel like I've learned the example through him. I try to be as much like him as I can.
That's amazing. And one of the things that you talked about, and I love the way you phrased it, at critical points in my life, humanity stepped in. And what a beautiful way to look at that. Those people and situations that stepped in where without them, you're not sure who you would be, but you are the person that you are because of them, and in spite of yourself, and in spite of the things that happened to you. And absolutely, humanity stepped in. And I love how gracious you are about giving that credit, because I know, coming from a similar background, there's a lot of work involved in it too. It's not just humanity stepping in or people. You come kind of riddled with baggage from all of that you still have to sift through and carry around with you. And it's how you do that, because certainly it can be used for good, just like it can be used for evil, like we saw growing up, the kids that got into the drugs and the alcohol in the same situation. So to not perpetuate it, it's more than not perpetuating it, it's going above and beyond and being more. And I love your graciousness for that. So the highlights for Pendola training, you work a lot with hundreds of high school kids. I actually have a tank top with your name on it. It's one of the softest ones I own. I don't like to wear it because I don't want to ruin it. It says Pendola training. And the kids are our future, and you see that. You were that kid at one point, and somebody made a difference to you. I did the same thing doing foster care as you do training high school athletes. You want to pay it forward and give it back and make some of those kids who are going to be our future, just if you could just make it just that much better, if you can, it's a drop in the bucket sort of thing. And I watch you do that. And a lot of them become state champions, All-Americans, nationals, world champions. You've worked with amazing names that in Reno, when you say them, you know them. But you yourself, in 2015, you were the Spartan World Championship for the Elite Masters Division. Mm-hmm. That's not just like well, yeah, one day I was out and I thought, why not try to be the Spartan World Championship? That was a pretty exceptional win, and I saw that in 2015, and also the duathlon national championship runner-up, and you remember the U.S. team. Mm-hmm. So you didn't really, I mean, like you had some injuries and you kind of worked through them, and you're pretty much badassing it on your own as well. That's paying it forward. And then, so the last thing I want you to tell me about is Aaron.
Yes.
So as a woman in a relationship, this is like one of my sappiest favorite things that you talk about. Erin is your wife, and yes. You told me she never let you give up on yourself, even when you're working double time, making no money.
Right.
Sleeping under the stairs. And you guys get together because you got through a lot of that together. And you feel like she believes in you so much and your dream, you get to spend each day helping people reach goals.
Yeah. And
tell me, and you have a 4-year-old.
Yes, Mia.
And they're fun. They can't spell yet. So you can spell stuff and they don't know what you're talking about. Tell me about Aaron.
Yeah. So, I think like most people, I really didn't know what I wanted when it came to relationships, I'm talking. And, when Aaron came along, I knew that she was a good person. You could tell that. And I knew that she was a hard worker. I could tell that we had enough in common that I wanted to be around her. But there was so much about her that I couldn't relate to. We grew up a lot differently. She has the most amazing supportive family you can't imagine. Every Sunday, they meet and have dinner together, and I really respect their family bond and how much they support each other. And I really always imagined being with somebody who grew up more in like a similar situation to me, and so, when I met Aaron, I felt like we had this immediate connection because at the root of it, at the core of it all, she was all of the things that I loved about, people. She is the first person to help someone whenever they're in need. She doesn't let anyone around her go without. She always tries to make the world better. She's just one of those people as you are, Jen, and I watched your video, by the way, and read about you, and it definitely brought tears to my eyes. So you're a very inspirational person yourself. But, I realized quickly that I needed a strong person in my life. And I was attracted to that with Erin. She's a very strong-minded person, and she's willing to work for anything and she doesn't expect life to just give her anything. And so we had that in common, even though we had very different histories. We had that in common, and we definitely built off of that. The next step for me was, you know, the whole getting married thing and having kids. Like, that wasn't going to happen either, because no offense, but I just, I didn't think that marriage was so great, not seeing what, I had seen in my life, and having kids, like, that didn't seem like such a great option either, because I always felt like, having kids was just a burden. And, I thought to myself, my kids will be the kids I work with at the gym, but, I don't have to worry about them financially, and I don't have to worry about going home and dealing with their problems. I can just, help them, while they're here, so to me, that was a good enough solution. And then Erin, she had other plans.
We always do.
That's right. That's right. And she's, and she, I, of course, slowly came around to the possibility of getting married. And so, of course, we got married. And then she told me one day that she was, pregnant. And one of the things that I thought I had, kind of skipped there was having to be a dad, because Erin wasn't supposed to be able to have kids. And so Mia really is our miracle baby. When she told me she was pregnant, I said, I didn't even think it could happen.
How? Wait a minute.
Right. Right. Mia was, she was 2 months premature. And so we had, the first 2 months with her in the hospital. And that was all, definitely, an experience in itself. Anybody who's had a preemie, they know when you're little baby, they just, preemies will stop breathing all of a sudden, and that's all just really, really difficult. But I knew the day we took her home that, everything was going to be fine. She was such a strong little baby. And I could just tell that she was going to be healthy and happy. And it's been great. I mean, she's the love of our lives. And of course, I learned through Mia that, I can be a good dad, and I don't have to, repeat what happened to people like ourselves. I think it's an important lesson that we can do things differently. And of course, every day that I spend with my girls is a blessed day. So I really, really am forever grateful for meeting Erin, because, she gave me a family. I have my Mia, I have her, and of course I have her very loving family who have all taken me in as one of their own. So I have a family now, and I never thought I would.
Yeah, I hear you there. Huge success story, Matt. Thank you so much for spending time with me. I'm going to plug you a little bit. You're working right now on some training videos and an ebook on strength and conditioning for triathletes. And you're doing that with Bobby McGee. And you're very fun. You're like, not the singer. Darn it. I wanted to see that video. And actually, Bobby McGee, who's the head triathlon coach for the U.S. Olympic Training Center. So you're doing some really amazing projects with some pretty big name people for athletes, as far as triathletes go. You are Rob Wolf's strength and conditioning coach, and you're getting interviewed there on the Paleo Solution soon. Mm-hmm. Pendola Training is still doing everything you set out to do back in 2001, giving back a lot to the community, training people that are athletes, and making sure that you do that. And you're very, very big, your philosophy on doing things injury-free. Not that I think coaches are like, do this and you'll either survive or you'll be screwed for life. I mean, I don't think coaches set you up to fail, but I think overtraining is so common. And what I really appreciate about your whole training philosophy is that you go the extra mile above and beyond to really do the strength assessment in Pendola Training. You do a lot about the individual person, and no one fits into a box. It's not like, oh, if you're a female that's 45 and you've done this before, this is where you go. You take a step back every time with every athlete that walks in your door and evaluate them head to toe as an individual regardless, and then work from there. And kudos to you. I have great appreciation for that. So
thank you.
yeah, and you can find, again, pendolatraining.com. You're everywhere. You're on Facebook, and you can find all your social links and all of that stuff. And I encourage people to, not necessarily because you're in the Reno area, but if you're not in the Reno area, to know what to look for in someone in your area.
Yes, 100%. You know, running is such a beautiful sport. And I know obviously it's a big part of your life. And I just hate to hear when people say, oh, running's bad for my knees, or I don't have the genetics for it. You know, if we look at somebody's biomechanics and we get into a little further, like you said, everybody is an individual. And if we really look at their gait and we understand how they're moving and we understand what we need to improve that movement, and we take it slowly, we can allow people to enjoy their running, you know, well into the twilight of their life. And that's, you know, to me, one of the biggest gifts we can give. I mean, going out and doing a trail run at sunrise, you know, that's something that everybody should be able to do, you know, and, or at least, you know, make it a hike, right? So I do think that that's probably one of the most important things that a facility like mine can offer somebody is, you know, like you mentioned before, is not about whether or not you're a state champion in high school, but are you still able to run, play with your kids, do all those things later on in life because you learned how to do it the right way.
Right. I love it. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening in to Jen Taylor Rerouting. Like, share, and of course, comment. I welcome input with attitude. Get a copy of my book on Amazon, Hello, My Name is Warrior Princess, or check out my website, jentaylor.net. And if you still want more, sign up for one of my coaching packages.